All right, everybody. If you can hear me and see me, please let me know in the chat. Otherwise, thanks for being here on a good Monday night where we're going to discuss a lot of stuff that's happening right now. And of course, it seems like the news cycle is just never ending when it comes to giving us examples as to why we should be preparing. So, thanks, news cycle, I guess. Looks like we got people here tonight. Hunt Outdoors, good to see you. Rural 2IC, good to see you as well. And thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Before we get going tonight, Mr. Landfill says 5x5. Dave Sickles is here. Harbor Prepper says 5x5 as well. Not so well known also says 5x5. Sounds like we're looking good and sounding good. And looking good, I meant visual quality. Maybe not, your personal taste when it comes to how I personally look. But let's get going tonight. I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel, and of course, thanks to them, I can go ahead and jump on live streams like this one and try to put out some good information while also having some access to cool equipment, so that's always beneficial. And the live streams are also supported by Genesis Gold Group. So if you want to go to magicpreppergold.com to see if they can help you out with precious metals, rolling over retirement accounts into gold-backed IRAs, or just sending precious metals right to your front door, those assets might actually maintain value. Who knows what else is going to happen out there? Make sure you chat with them about whatever it is you might be considering, and they can certainly help you out. So magicpreppergold.com is always a good place to go for that, and I appreciate them supporting these live streams so that we can have these very important conversations, and I put that link in the live chat for you, and there will be a link in the description as well as in the pinned comment. So let's get things rolling tonight, and just so everyone's aware, somebody said one time, hey, Magic, you should put your sponsorship mentions at the beginning of the chat so we don't interrupt it later on, and I thought, you know what? That's a good idea. Let's do that. So thank you, whoever suggested that. I think you're onto something here. So obviously, there's a lot that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm talking about how there's going to be more strikes, how there is certain levels of infiltration coming through our border in more than one way, and how there is some pre-positioning going on when it comes to a foreign adversary's military. And we should all be at least aware of these things. I don't know about concerned as much anymore because we know where things are going, and there shouldn't necessarily be a worry about what's happening. You should just assume things are getting worse, right? Like, we're not necessarily on a path of positivity right now, but what we can do is be aware of it so that when things take a turn, we're not caught off guard and we're able to react to it properly, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Round one, good to see you. Glad you are here. My mom says I'm keen. Hi, all from Iran. I'm migrating via Mexico soon to realizing my dream of starting a paragliding school. All right, then. So let's keep moving forward here. Cops Help Americans says the airstrikes will continue until morale approves, and I completely agree. Why are things going to continue in the way that they currently are? Well, because nothing's changing. So we're just dropping bombs, and then missiles are being fired at us again, and then more bombs are dropping, and then more missiles are firing. So these strikes will continue, and as long as they are ongoing, there's more and more chances of, let's just say, collateral damage that maybe wasn't necessarily intended and then leads to something much worse. So we had this happen today. I actually watched this briefing. I thought it was kind of interesting based on a few data points that came out of it. One of the biggest takeaways was, hey, how come you guys are doing all this and then they're still shooting at us? Like, I thought this was supposed to stop them from attacking our bases or attacking shipping lanes or anything else regarding what you guys are in the Middle East for right now. And even though you are retaliating for these attacks, it seems like they just keep attacking. And of course, the response there was, well, we're not trying to get involved with any additional conflict in the Middle East, but we do have to make sure to have some level of balance when it comes to what it is they're trying to do and what we're trying to prevent. So there really aren't any good answers coming out of the Pentagon regarding why this campaign's not necessarily working, which I think we all know why, because there's a different level of respect, let's just say, over there in that theater right now. But just to kind of go off of this for you, this is from today at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So this is relatively new information. After a weekend of retaliatory strikes, the United States on Sunday warned Iran and the militias it arms and funds that it will conduct more attacks if American forces in the Mideast continue to be targeted, but that it does not want an open-ended military campaign across the region. And we'll talk about in just a second here that we are, in fact, still being attacked, so I think we all know exactly what's going on. Okay? We are prepared to deal with anything that any group or any country tries to come at us with, said Jake Sullivan, President Joe Biden's national security advisor. Sullivan said Iran should expect a swift and forceful response if it, and not one of its proxies, chose to respond directly against the U.S. So he's not weighing out the option that, striking Iran is off the table. Like, that is definitely being put forth. So, Sullivan delivered the warnings during a series of interviews with TV news shows after the U.S. and Britain on Saturday struck 36 Houthi targets in Yemen. The Iran-backed militants have fired on American and international interests repeatedly in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war. An air assault Friday in Iraq and Syria targeted other Iranian-backed militias and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in retaliation for the drone strike that killed 3 U.S. troops in Jordan last weekend. The U.S. fired again at Houthi targets on Sunday. So a lot of targets have been striked over this past weekend. A lot! And it hasn't deterred them from attacking us once again. We cannot rule out that there will be future attacks from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, or from Houthi, Sullivan said. He said the president has told his commanders that they need to be positioned to respond to further attacks as well. Now understand that currently we are striking Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, right? So 3 countries are being striked by us right now. And they're attacking these Iranian-backed militant groups. And when they're talking about this in their interviews, they're actually referencing the IRGC on a regular basis, right? They're talking about how they're funded and backed by the IRGC. They're trained by the IRGC. The IRGC is involved. And of course, that means we are de facto at war with the IRGC, which is Iran's military. So this should tell you everything you need to know. Just because we're only striking, 3 countries in the area right now. It's all certain targets that, we're making sure are the actual intended target, right? Even though there's some conflicting reports coming out of the Middle East regarding that. But the U.S. has blamed the attack at the Tower 22 base in Jordan on January 28th on the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, a coalition of Iranian-backed militias. Iran has tried to distance itself from the drone strike, saying the militias act independently of its direction. Although our military and the Pentagon specifically let you know that they are, in fact, completely involved with the IRGC. Biden is not looking for a wider war, Sullivan said, when questioned about the potential for strikes inside Iran that would expand the conflict in the volatile region. But when asked about the possibility of direct escalation by the Iranians, he said if they chose to respond directly to the United States, they would be met with a swift and forceful response from us. Okay? So, this is also kind of telling you that they've drawn a line in the sand when it comes to what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. And even though this response might not be exactly what others may have anticipated or preferred or whatever you want to look at it as, it does seem that once American lives were lost, things escalated into a different territory. So that should kind of tell you that if we see additional American lives being lost in the Middle East from these attacks, that it will push us into an even more dangerous snowball effect, right? Where open-ended war in the Middle East seems to be more and more possible, right? So, let's see here. I just want to check here real quick with a couple people in the chat because I appreciate all of you. 3 Dogs and a Paw says, you do a great job. Thanks. Well, I appreciate that. I really do. And I hope everyone knows, especially regarding certain, recent videos out on the channel and whatnot, but whenever I'm analyzing these different events, I'm not trying to necessarily take sides. I'm not trying to have bias or put politics into every single conversation. Sometimes I'm just looking at an event objectively to try to share my thought process as to why it applies to preparedness or what we can learn from it. And I think it would be at least somewhat wise to try to remove some of your emotional bias from your thought process when analyzing some of this information and look at it for what it exactly is rather than for what you want it to be, right? I think that's something that all of us struggle with, of course, but I've had a lot of emotional responses recently, and it's just because I'm referencing a certain conflict that's happening right now, and I don't, necessarily come out directly and say, I don't like this and that, right? That's the point, was to analyze what's happening, not what I like about it or don't like about it, right? So just keep that in mind. But it's something that I just wanted to mention because it's been a volatile comment section this weekend, all right? So, Dave says, I saw Nadler wearing Joe's banana hammock. I'm apologizing to you right now. I hope you get therapy for that. Let's move forward, okay? So, like I said, these strikes will continue. Well, why? Because the strikes that are happening right now aren't stopping, and in fact, they're likely inciting more of them. Iran-backed group claims strike on Syria base used by U.S. as Israel-Hamas war fuels risky tit-for-tat. Now, in that press briefing, it was said multiple times that, yeah, this happened, but, the base is just used by us, and, no American servicemen or personnel were injured or killed in the attack, so therefore, we're not counting it as an attack, right? But this is base that's used by the U.S., and people that were allied with lost their lives there, but I guess that's not significant at this point, right? So it seems like we're trying to cherry pick every particular situation when it comes to our response. But anyway, Erbil, Iraq. An Iran-backed militia group in Iraq claimed responsibility Monday for a drone strike. The ads on these pages are awful sometimes. For a drone strike. Oh, and by the way, the reason the ad blocker is not running is because, let's just say this platform I'm currently on decided to make your computer not work when you're using them. That's a whole different conversation. But anyway, Monday for a drone strike against a base in eastern Syria used by U.S. troops that killed 6 American allied Kurdish fighters. The attack, which caused no American casualties, appeared to be the first significant response from what the U.S. calls Iran's proxy groups to U.S. airstrikes against the militias in the region. See how we're constantly making sure you're aware of the fact that these are Iranian proxies. They're not militia groups within their own territory. They're not acting on their own volition. It's always Iran, which, look, is probably accurate, right? Like, I'm not trying to argue that point. What I'm trying to say is that this should tell you where we're going. Like, this is telegraphing what our intentions will be down the road here, right? And that's unfortunate because I think we all know Iran has been on that list for quite some time. But the Lindsey Grahams of the world tend to get what they want, even if we don't like it. So, on Friday, the U.S. started striking the militias of an umbrella group known as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. In response to those groups, stepped up attacks on U.S. bases in the region, including the deadly drone strike on a base in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members on January 28. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces said Monday that a drone struck a training ground the previous night at the Al Omar base in Syria's eastern province of Deir el-Zor. The SDF trains commandos there, and some of the roughly 900 U.S. troops deployed in Syria as part of the ongoing mission against ISIS have been based there. See, this is not an insignificant place just because American service personnel weren't injured or killed in this attack. But because they weren't, they're trying to say that it wasn't necessarily rising to the occasion, let's just say. Okay. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq released a video claiming responsibility for the attack that included purported images of the drone being launched from an unspecified location. So this is going to continue. Now, while I was researching this escalation and while I was trying to figure out, hey, where does this go? How does this work? Like, what does this do in the sense of the Middle East, right? Because here we are, we're striking targets in Syria, we're striking targets in Yemen, we're striking targets in Iraq, and these militia groups keep coming at us and keep throwing more at us, right? And so I'm trying to figure out exactly where this leads. What does this do next? Like, who are we actually at war with? And then I found some interesting information that I just want to share with everybody, okay? But it's very strange. But, I mean, it very much looks like not only are we probably going to be at war with Iran here in the relative future, but we might as well be at war with Iraq as well, which sounds like something from 20 years ago, but here we are again, and it's just the Middle East once again. So what do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing that a lot of people might not be aware of. Iraq condemns U.S. airstrikes against Iran-linked groups. Okay, well, so what, Magic Prepper? What's the big deal? Okay, well, let me tell you. Iraqi government officials on Saturday condemned U.S. airstrikes on Iran-linked targets in Iraq, saying the attack showed that U.S. forces had become a threat to their host country, a sentiment that will likely hasten demands for the U.S.-led military coalition in Iraq to leave. Militia officials named 16 fighters they said were killed in the strikes late Friday, including 5 medics they said died when an airstrike hit a base hospital in western Al-Anbar province. The Popular Mobilization Forces, made up of armed groups that are now part of Iraqi government security forces, said 7 of the 16 fatalities were killed when the U.S. bombed its Al-Anbar province operations headquarters. It said at least 36 more people were injured and searches were ongoing for missing fighters. The mayor of Al-Qaim, a city close to the border with Syria, where some of the targets were located, told NPR by phone that at least 1 civilian was also killed in the strikes and at least 5 homes near the operations headquarters were destroyed. We had information that the area would be bombed a day or two before, said the mayor, Turki Muhammad Khalaf. He said many of the residents near the base had evacuated their homes as a precaution. Now, here's something that you might not have been aware of, and here's something that I think is very relevant based on how quickly this whole crisis can escalate and how many countries are going to get directly involved. As of right now, it appears that Iraq is directly involved. We're not saying we're at war with Iran, right? But we are attacking Iraqi militia groups in Iraq, right, and Syria, and they're in the Iraqi military. The Popular Mobilization Forces that are now part of Iraqi government security forces. What's going on with that? This is going to get into a much larger situation because this whole thing has basically been compromised and our relations with Iraq are about to go right down the drain. And Iran is largely involved. So we're going to be at war with both countries, basically. And it's because this Popular Mobilization Force has become so prevalent and popular in Iraq and has gained so much power, traction, and military status. So this is from February 2nd. Like, this is all coming out. Everything we're discussing tonight is new information. So this is just something for you to be aware of, but to be at least in the thought process that even if we don't go to direct war with Iran, we're currently at war with Iraq in one way or another, in a very strange, reminiscent sort of way from 20 years ago. The Popular Mobilization Force is on its way to becoming Iraq's preeminent political and institutional power, with its economic power also expanding. The umbrella militia organization, which is led by Iran-aligned factions, has markedly enhanced its influence over the Iraqi state and government over the past 2 years. The PMF, with backing and support from Iran, hopes to drive the United States out of Iraq as the war in the Gaza Strip unfolds. Since regional tensions heightened after October 7th, Iran-backed militias have attacked U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria at least 160 times, including an attack in Jordan by Kataib Hezbollah, a predominant group within the PMF. Within it, right? So you can see how incestual these groups are when it comes to sharing members or harboring each other or supporting each other. It's all one large conglomerate, but they're using these different proxies as a way to evade any type of retaliation or any liability, right? So this is how it's all beginning anyway. Okay. A predominant group within the PMF and its sister group, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, that killed 3 Americans. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and a base in Erbil have been targeted repeatedly, as has the Kurdistan region. Now, keep in mind, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is considered to be American soil. So if it's being targeted and attacked, America is being targeted and attacked. Keep that in mind. That's how embassies work. Over the past 2 years, the PMF has expanded its influence domestically. However, the group could decidedly instrumentalize, these are large words, the war in Gaza in 2024, raising the prospect of further attacks on U.S. forces and the Kurdistan region, both of which impose limits on the PMF's influence and are essential to the campaign to counter the Islamic State. To protect U.S. interests, contain Iran's influence, and prevent an ISIS resurgence, Washington must keep its troops in Iraq and consider decisive military measures that address and preempt the escalatory attacks by the PMF and its backers in Iran. So, look, I don't think we have to dive any further into that, but it is very interesting when you actually start to peel back some of those layers and realize that the PMF is highly involved in the Iraqi government, has a lot of power, both economically and politically, and we're currently attacking them. Like, they said that they have casualties from our airstrikes. And since they're not going anywhere based on their current trajectory, and they are Iran adjacent, there's really no reason to believe that we're not going to just be at war with Iraq as well if we aren't already, especially because their whole initiative is to try to kick the U.S. out of Iraq. I don't see that happening. I don't necessarily see us just leaving and saying bye because they asked us to, right? I think there's too many interests in Iraq. There's too much of an investment, and I just don't think we're going to do that. So expect things to just get worse there as well. A lot of people are paying attention to Iran and Syria and Yemen, of course, and Iraq as well, but they aren't aware of the fact that Iraq is basically engaged in open conflict with the United States right now. It's very interesting, okay? Now, I do want to say we have the atmospheric river situation happening in California right now. There's not much to be said. There's hundreds of thousands without power. Obviously, that should tell you where your priorities should lie when it comes to preps, right? So make sure you have backup power sources. Make sure you have the ability to eat and drink for a long period of time before services come back up and running, right? But that's something that, as someone who grew up in Florida, right, that's something that I just thought was an annual event. Hurricane season's here. We make sure we have all our extra stuff. And we call it a day, right? You got your sandbags, you got your batteries, your flashlights, your radios, you got your bottled water, you got canned food, and you're good to go, right? So California doesn't have the same mentality because they don't necessarily face these things on a regular basis. But I mean, they live in earthquake country. They have other natural disasters on a regular basis, like wildfires and things of that nature. So this shouldn't be as much of an issue. But because people don't learn, and because the masses aren't interested in preparedness, because it takes sacrifice and investment and time and energy, no matter what happens, the population's never going to get to the point where the majority is prepared. So just be aware of that. And if you're in California, I hope you're doing well and I hope you're safe. And I also want you to know that buying preparedness related items during or after a natural disaster is the worst time to do it, right? So if right now you're in Southern California and trying to go buy a generator, do you think you're going to find one, or find one that's reasonably priced? No. So always keep that in mind. You always want to have things before you need them. And that's the unfortunate side of prepping. You invest in things that you might not actually need until you do. But I wanted to mention that because it is happening. It's a big deal, but it's also something that should just be part of the routine, if you ask me at this point, right? Natural disasters are natural, which means they happen. Anyhow, let's see here. David Kramer just joining. Well, I'm glad you made it. Knight, who says, I'm in Northern Cali, north of Sacramento. These storms are not being exaggerated. That's good to know. And I'm glad that you are doing okay to the point where you're at least here in this live stream. And I used to live, northeast of Sacramento. So I'm probably very aware of your area. But stay safe. And I hope you're better prepared than the average person. Because let's be honest, we all know SoCal right now, especially in the more populated areas, that's got to be kind of a nightmare, right? So J-Pass says, doing fine here in Grass Valley. Well, Grass Valley, definitely close to where I used to live. Let's keep going. There's a lot of things happening, okay? All right. So, do you think that this is going to cost anything when it comes to funding or anything along those lines? I have a feeling it will. And this is going to link us to the southern border, which I know some of you are probably wondering about. So let's definitely dive into that as well tonight, because there's some things that I want to talk about regarding the southern border, but interestingly enough, maybe it's the wrong border to be talking about right now. And that's definitely going to be interesting. As U.S. troops take fire in Middle East, lawmakers consider billions in new funding. Oh, I wouldn't have guessed. Billions of dollars for U.S. military operations in the Middle East, where American troops have been under consistent fire from Iran-backed militants since October, are on the line as lawmakers bicker over U.S. border politics. Now, this article is from today. So, like I said, everything we're talking about tonight is very recent information, and that's actually kind of upsetting because of how ludicrous some of it is. But here we are. So, the long-awaited bipartisan Senate agreement to provide funding for the conflicts in Israel and Ukraine in exchange for U.S. immigration reforms includes $2.4 billion to support American military operations in the Central Command region. The Senate is expected to take an initial procedural vote on the bill as soon as Wednesday, but conservative GOP complaints that the immigration provisions do not go far enough to shut down the U.S. southern border, have put the fate of the entire package, including the Middle East funding and funding for weapons for Ukraine, into question. The United States and our allies are facing multiple and complex, in places coordinated challenges from adversaries who seek to disrupt democracy and expand authoritarian influence around the globe, Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Democrat in New York, said in a statement Sunday that touts the bill provides billions in vital investments in America's national security to address growing threats in the Middle East and the Red Sea. The military-industrial complex is really enjoying all of this. So, now what's up with this border bill? What are they talking about? You got getting all this military funding, but they're trying to say that they're trying to lock down the border, right? Okay. This is not how it's supposed to work, okay? And now this isn't political. This is literally just what you need to know. Because after this story, we're going to talk about the threats that are coming through our borders, and not just the southern border, but it's important, okay? We're in times of war, which we're currently in, regardless of what anyone thinks. When a superpower in the world is in a direct, conventional, hot conflict with a NATO-adjacent nation, the world in many ways is at war. And we are at war because our adversaries are constantly trying to undermine us, right? So while you're at war, you take security to a new level. You should be a little bit more concerned with it, right? But we're not. So, Senate border bill says non-Mexican children won't be counted in migrant total to trigger mandatory shutdown. Do you know about the mandatory shutdown? It's not as beneficial as you might think. The Senate's bipartisan $118 billion border security and foreign aid package includes a stipulation that unaccompanied minors not originally from Mexico would not be included in the total number of migrant encounters tallied in the 5,000 weekly average that triggers emergency authority to shut down the border. Okay. American First Legal, a conservative group, brought attention specifically to pages 212 and 213 of the package on X. The new break glass emergency authority is a disaster. The secretary may use it if there are 4,000 or more aliens encountered each day. 28,000 per week, 121,000 a month, 1.46 million a year. But he must use it when there are more than 5,000 a day, over a week, or 8,500 in a single day. Those are insane numbers and totally unacceptable to the American people, the group wrote. And non-Mexican unaccompanied children are not counted in the total that triggers the emergency authority, they added. Okay? At a 7-day rolling average of 5,000 encounters per day or 8,500 encounters in a single day, the Department of Homeland Security must use mandatory activation and is required to shut the border down and turn away anyone who crosses according to the legislative proposal. No new asylum claims would be allowed and anybody crossing would be removed, putting an end to the notion that any migrant who makes it into the U.S. soil would need to be processed. Under the bill, Border Patrol would not process illegal border crossers and they would be removed. Now, Just so you're aware, this is the bill they're fighting over right now in Congress, right? And they are trying to tack on military funding for Israel and Ukraine in this bill, and then trying to say that this bill is actually beneficial for what's happening at the border. But 5,000 a day is what's required for automatic shutdown. 4,000 a day is where the secretary may shut it down, which we know he will not. But even 1,000 a day is too many people right now in a time of war. It's too many people anytime in most people's opinion, right? But regardless of your ideology or how you sway on the immigration debate, 1,000 people a day is too many people. Like 500 people a day is too many. Like, you understand, like, this is a time of war. We have too many people pouring through the borders, and 5,000 a day, I don't understand how that's an improvement. This is not beneficial to anybody other than the military-industrial complex. So keep that in mind, but that's their whole solution here. And now, why is this a problem? Okay, hey, Exile Reviews, thank you so much. I appreciate you modding tonight. I appreciate all the mods. And yes, thanks for sharing the Subscribe Star page. If you guys want to join Subscribe Star, it's $5 a month, and I have my members-only live chat right after this chat tonight at 9:45 Central Standard Time. And if you're on Subscribe Star or a YouTube channel member, you can be there. So thanks for reminding me on that one, Exile Reviews. And if you guys want to hit the thumbs up, that would also be cool because I never say that and I'm supposed to. Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you so much for modding. Much appreciated. Old Marine, I appreciate you. I'm glad you've been around for a few years. It's awesome that you're still here. Some people have recently told me they're not going to be here anymore because I don't provide any value. So I apologize if that's how you feel, but I'm doing the best I can. 800 plus videos, man. I'm just doing what I can here. So let's move forward. What's with the border? What's with the border? Okay, well, we have things happening there, okay? There are terror threats coming across the border. This goes into the part of the equation where we're saying T infiltration in the title of tonight's live stream because there's just, you know what that means, right? DCNF reporter discusses Al-Shabaab member caught in Minnesota. Now, here's a couple of things I want you to take away from this. First off, these people aren't always from every organization that comes to mind first and foremost, right? So just because someone's not in Al-Qaeda doesn't mean that they don't have malicious intent, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that this person is in Minnesota, right? So this isn't isolated to the southern border. This happened at the southern border. This is where that person entered the country. But they made their way all the way to Minnesota before being apprehended, which means that even if you're not on a border, you are likely infiltrated one way or the other. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. You should be concerned about the border security, especially during a time of war. We've had these groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, all these different groups out in the Middle East that are like, we have people in your country right now, and we also know how to get in. We have the cartels exploiting the border on a regular basis, making millions of dollars off human smuggling and fentanyl. We have China funding the cartels in order to put fentanyl throughout the country and disrupt our daily lives. Like, it needs to be secure because we're in a time of war. Regardless of how you feel about it in times of peace, which, I think we all have our personal feelings about that, of course, but in a time of war, there should be no debate. But here we are. So what do you want? A Daily Caller Foundation reporter warned terror threats have crossed the U.S. border during a Saturday morning appearance on Newsmax. A member of Al-Shabaab, a radical Islamic terrorist group based out of Somalia, was captured in Minnesota in January after being released into the United States following an initial detention at the U.S.-Mexico border, according to a memo obtained by the DCNF. DCNF investigative reporter Jenny Terre discussed the memo with Wake Up America weekend hosts Sarah Williamson and Michael Graham. We exclusively reported earlier this week that an Al-Shabaab terrorist had made their way through the southern border, was caught by Border Patrol in March, was actually released after they determined he was a mismatch, which was completely incorrect. He was not a mismatch on the terror watch list, and ICE found that out in January, and they just a few days ago nabbed this guy in Minnesota. So absolutely there are terror threats coming across the southern border, and Border Patrol was also warned in a memo that we obtained earlier after the October 7th terrorist attack that there could be Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah terrorists crossing. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer of Minnesota demanded an explanation about the incident Friday from Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Okay? Like, these things are actually happening. And these people, like you heard, they processed him in March, right? So he's been in Minnesota for what, 9 months? Okay? And who knows what could have been done during that time. Emmer writes to Homeland Security Secretary over potential terrorist caught living in Minnesota. So these people don't just come in, do a bad thing, and then leave. They set up operations, right? And I know we've talked about this in the past, but just keep in mind that during the Cold War, the way Russian spies integrated into America in order to send information back to the homeland was to assimilate. They bought houses, they got jobs, they bought cars, they had families. Like, they appeared American. And there's no reason to think that any other group that would have malicious intent that would come here wouldn't do the same. Okay? Minnesota's 6th District Congressman Tom Emmer is raising concerns to U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over terrorists entering the country illegally. Emmer cites the website Daily Caller, which we just went over that whole thing. He was initially flagged as a member of the terror group, but federal officials wrongly determined that there had been an error. The Terrorist Screening Center corrected its mistake after he was in the wind. The Daily Caller says the man was involved in arms trafficking before he was picked up again in Minnesota. I wonder, who would a terrorist traffic arms to within the United States? Also, who would they get involved with in order to traffic arms? Can you think of any criminal entities that operate with impunity here in the United States right now that may be adept at trafficking arms? Let me know in the chat. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot of things, actually. Emmer asks Mayorkas 6 questions in a letter addressed to the secretary. He wants the memo to be handed over to Congress and a briefing given to all members of the Minnesota delegation, which includes 8 representatives and 2 senators. Emmer is also seeking information on how DHS is working to avoid making the same mistake again. Okay? So, it's happening. Now, since this is in Minnesota, that's kind of like north, right? And Minnesota is a border state, and so is North Dakota. And I am in a border state, and I am neighboring Minnesota. So I thought, what's up with the northern border? Anything going on there? Well, this article came out February 1st. And I thought it was interesting. And I think you guys should be aware of this, because this is not getting any attention. it's not getting any attention because everyone's focused on the southern border. Everyone's focused on Texas. Everyone's focused on what's happening there with the National Guard and the Border Patrol and everything else. But the northern border is actually worse when it comes to terrorists. And that concerns me, being a northern border state. Northern border continues to outpace southwest border on terrorist-connected apprehensions. Oh. In fiscal 2023, there were 736 known or suspected terrorists apprehended at the northern and southwest borders, the Center Square first reported. They represent the greatest number recorded in U.S. history. Last year, the greatest number of known or suspected terrorists were apprehended at our borders in U.S. history. I just wanted to reiterate that. Why? Why are they all coming here now? It's just because the country's so much nicer than it used to be? Is it because the cost of living has gone down? Is it because Starbucks? I don't know. A significant majority, 66%, were apprehended at the northern border, 487. By comparison, 249 were apprehended at the southwest border. That doesn't sound like what the media has been telling me. The trend continues in fiscal 2024 with KST northern border apprehensions outpacing those at the southwest border by a similar margin. By the way, that margin is, 2/3. Okay. The fiscal year to date, there have been 144 KSTs apprehended, according to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol or Border Protection data last updated January 26th. So in the month of January, not even the entire month, just the first 26 days of 2024, we've had 144 possible terrorists apprehended. Last year, there was 736. What's 12 times 144? Well, I know that it's more than 1,200. So we're on track to have a lot more this year than even last year. And last year was a record. Why are they all coming here now? I don't get it, right? It's got to be all the opportunity, I would assume. The majority, 90 of the 144, were apprehended at the northern border, nearly all at northern border ports of entry. KSTs are primarily apprehended two different ways by two different federal agents. They're apprehended by Office of Field Operations agents working at land ports of entry and by Border Patrol agents working between ports of entry. At the northern border, the majority of KSTs are apprehended at northern border ports of entry. At the southwest border, the majority apprehended between ports of entry. The terrorist screening data set is the federal database that contains sensitive information on terrorist identities, CBP said. It originated as a consolidated terrorist watch list to house information on known or suspected terrorists, but evolved over the last decade to include additional individuals who represent a potential threat to the United States, including known affiliates of watch-listed individuals. Okay, so they have expanded the definition of it, but at the same time, these numbers are escalating. Now, on the southern border, they're catching them in between ports of entry, which means they're crossing the border in places where it's, let's just call it wild, right? It's not just walking right through the gate and hoping for the best, which, by the way, I will mention on a regular basis, apparently, that an immigrant that I knew who was not legal here said that they got in the country by literally just walking backwards through the gate because it looked like they were going out, but really they were coming in. So that's how good the security is. But either way, at the northern border, they're all coming through ports of entry and being apprehended, which means they're trying to get in probably with false identities or false documentation. They're trying to get in the legit way, which raises a few questions. One, why? The northern border is not hard to get across in comparison to the southern. Like, there's not like a river that separates a huge majority of it, right? And there's also like nothing. Like, if I drive up to the northern border right now, which I'll probably do here relatively soon just to kind of check it out and maybe let you guys kind of get a glimpse as to what it looks like. But there's just nothing there. You could just walk across it. But there's also like nothing there, which would, I guess, be difficult to just walk across because when will you get to something? Who knows? And if someone notices you, that person is not going to like that you're there, most likely. And here, at least in North Dakota, people are a little bit defensive of their property, let's just say. So, either way, they're coming through ports of entry. And if they're trying to do it maliciously, even though they're taking the appropriate, I guess, way to get in, it makes you wonder what the thought process is there. It makes you wonder how many have gotten through using falsified information or who knows what else. But I at least question that strategy because it kind of makes you wonder if there's something more to it because they're not just trying to run in through the wild areas. They're trying to get in through the legitimate areas, which would mean once they're in, there's way less of a red flag, right? So keep that in mind. But in case you don't know like where your ports of entry are, I'm going to put it in the chat right now, okay? And this is a list from the CBP. It's a government website, okay? So it should be legit, I guess. But it tells you exactly where your ports of entry are based on your state. And even if you live in the inside of the country, the interior still has airports, right? So they're going to have airports listed as ports of entry, but they're also going to have, land ports of entry listed if you live in a border state. So if I click on North Dakota right here, it'll take me to all these different ports of entry, and then I can find the one closest to me and at least be aware of like that's maybe somewhere that terrorists are trying to get in. I don't know. Now, the majority of these terrorists are trying to get in through the areas near New Hampshire and Vermont, okay? And there's a word that they call that area, which I can't remember now off the top of my tongue, which, it was in that last article, but I closed it out already. Regardless, that's the most popular area for people to try to cross illegally. So if you're in New England and you're in, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, or any of those states that have a northern border up there, you should definitely be on the lookout because that's where a lot of this activity is occurring, way more than what's happening in North Dakota. We have our share of illegal immigration from the northern border. We really do. But the majority of these terrorist apprehensions are happening over there in New England, okay? Which might be by design because there are much larger population zones in New England, and there are much, I would just say, more valuable targets, basically, if it came to the types of attacks that those people are usually engaged in. So just be aware of that, okay? Now, I did see some people chatting it up here. Are there easy access points on the border in North Dakota? I wonder where they're getting up north. There are bees nuts, and I've looked at the ones near me in the sense of looking at Google photos and stuff like that, just to kind of get an idea of what it looks like and how things operate. But I'm going to take a trip up there one day just because I just think it'd be interesting, right? No one looks at the northern border. Might as well take a look, right? Knight who says knee says true, but coming in via Canada means putting up with Trudeau and all the flying hockey sticks, and that is true. But you know what? A lot of people are coming in through Canada, especially Chinese nationals. I don't know how they get there. So let's go ahead. Montana kind of swindled Idaho out of the northern part of the state. You're not wrong about that one, Hillbill. You're not wrong. Now, we have some weird stuff going on with Mexico. And so we're still kind of talking about the border, right? Well, Mexico right now, they're doing something that makes me upset. And they're opening the door for other countries to do the same, actually. But they're suing U.S. gun makers, or they're trying to, right? And they cleared a big hurdle because there's usually a federal law in place that doesn't allow gun manufacturers to be sued based on crimes committed by their products or whatever, right? We all know that whole thing that, of course, certain aspects of our political spectrum are trying to get rid of. But Mexico is getting through. This is proceeding, okay? So, and this is a story from today. Mexico's lawsuit against U.S. gun makers has cleared a big hurdle. Okay? On January 22nd, a U.S. federal appeals court revived a lawsuit by the Mexican government, the whole government, accusing America's largest gun makers of aiding and abetting the trafficking of weapons across the border. This is all a tactic to attack you in the wallet and to attack our Second Amendment rights and to hurt manufacturers because they cannot get rid of the American right to own firearms. So they are now going after the manufacturers as best they can, and countries like Mexico are doing it in a certain way that's actually looking viable, which is unfortunate and concerning, and it's opening up the doors to other countries to do the same thing, which means who knows how far this could go, how many countries could get involved, but it would benefit our adversaries to remove American gun ownership from the equation because it's a problem for them. It really is. It always will be. But at the same time, Mexico being involved in this is concerning too, and I'll tell you why here in just a minute. But first, let's talk about this just for a second because I want you to think of this. We're in war right now as a world, as the world turns, we're currently in hot conflict one way or the other. It's happening, right? And a foreign country is suing American manufacturers and trying to hurt them and stop them from being able to, manufacture guns, basically. I wonder if there could be any benefit there. But litigation against gun makers is almost always tossed out because of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA, a 2005 federal law that protects gun makers from being held liable for crimes committed with their products. But the decision handed down last month shows that Mexico's case differs from earlier lawsuits in two important respects: the violations that the country has accused gun makers of committing, and the overwhelming amount of evidence it has to support its allegations. And they're going after Glock, Smith & Wesson, Colt, all these companies. Like, these are not small companies they're trying to go after. This is the entire government of Mexico is suing Glock, Smith & Wesson, and Colt. This is problematic, okay? I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but I don't like where this is going, okay? And the gun makers are basically saying that their products are not the problem. Mexico's law enforcement and their ability to enforce the law is the problem. Their problems with criminal entities like the cartels is the real problem, which I think most of us could agree on. But it's happening, and it's moving forward. So keep an eye on this case. Now, one of the reasons why this concerns me and why Mexico as a whole concerns me is, first off, it's a hub for horrible criminal activity. Second off, it is also a Chinese adjacent entity at this point, right? And third off, the president might be cartel corrupted. What? Yeah, turns out that could be the thing, I guess. And now it starts to kind of make you feel like there's more to the story when the government of Mexico is suing gun manufacturers here in the United States, but the president is also corrupt with the cartels? What? Who would have thought? I would have never thought that. On the menu today, get ready to start your week with some major dot connecting, as a new report contends that the president of Mexico, Andres Manuel López Obrador, has been cozy with the notorious Sinaloa cartel for a long time. While the record of the cartel's extensive and lucrative ties to China, wait, what? China? In production of fentanyl and methamphetamine is growing clearer and clearer. There's a lot of money to be made from ruining Americans' lives, and the trail of drug trafficking profits leads back to one particularly infamous city. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign team wants to put the president on TikTok. Okay. I thank Eric Erickson for calling my attention to two long-suspected connections that are more confirmed than many people realize. The connections between Mexican President Andres Manuel López Obrador and the Sinaloa cartel, and between the Sinaloa cartel and China. I don't know if I've ever said this before once in my life. This report in ProPublica from last week should have shaken up the relationship between the U.S. and Mexican governments. And perhaps it has in ways we cannot see. But you would think the headline, DEA finds evidence that Mexico's president has been in the pocket of the cartels all along, would have made a bigger splash. Years before Andres Manuel López Obrador was elected as Mexico's leader in 2018, U.S. drug enforcement agents uncovered what they believed was substantial evidence that major cocaine traffickers had funneled some $2 million to his first presidential campaign. According to more than a dozen interviews with U.S. and Mexican officials and government documents reviewed by ProPublica, the money was provided to campaign aides in 2006 in return for a promise that López Obrador administration would facilitate the traffickers' criminal operations. The investigation did not establish whether López Obrador sanctioned or even knew of the traffickers' reported donations. But officials said the inquiry, which was built on the extensive cooperation of a former campaign operative and a key drug informant, did produce evidence that one of López Obrador's closest aides had agreed to the proposed arrangement. Okay? Look, I'm not trying to say that Mexico's suing gun companies to try to hurt Americans' ability to protect themselves from whatever cartel activities might exist here in the near future. But it is interesting that all this is coming out now, and it also is interesting that these ties to the Sinaloa cartel, as well as the Sinaloa cartel's ties to China, are just so suddenly public. It just makes you wonder. It makes you wonder. So, just saying. We all knew that Mexico's politicians were corrupted, or else they don't live very long. But we also need to keep in mind that a lot of what's happening to our country is coming from down south. Okay. Yep. I'm mad at Mexico already. They need to step off, says Oki Khan. You know what I'm saying? The Salmonella cartel. Good stuff. We should sue Mexico for the drugs coming into our country. Oath taker? I'm in. I don't think it's a bad idea. maybe that'll wake somebody up. I don't know. Plus, who's going to, where are they going to get the money from? Cartels? Well, they're not going to like that very much, are they? So, anyway, just keep all this in mind. Things are way more connected than you want to admit. I don't want to admit it, but it does seem this way. Okay? So, let's move on. Speaking of China and Sinaloa cartels and stuff of that nature, what is China trying to do? Well, it was, put out earlier in the week, last week, but not by Monday, which means we didn't get to cover it yet. Chinese cyber attacks are intended to induce societal panic across America, security directors tell Congress. Should you be prepared for this? I would say yes. Even if they're just saying it to say it, why would they say it? Well, first off, because it's a real threat. Or second off, because if it were to just happen from some source, unbeknownst to us, they already told you who did it, right? China's strategic plan to infiltrate the U.S. cyber infrastructure includes attempts to induce panic and unsettle everyday American life, a witness testified to Congress on Wednesday. Jen Easterly, director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, told the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party that ransomware attacks on U.S. businesses or critical systems are intended to induce societal panic, which is the end game. I don't know how else to say that. Have you guys ever seen Die Hard 4, right? Which one was that one called? Die Hard with a Vengeance or something like that? Either way, it's the one with Stephen Long in it, right? I think that's his name. I don't even know anymore. But what I can say is that they did a fire sale in that movie, right? Where they lied to everybody via AI imagery basically and showed the Capitol exploding, and then they cleared all the bank accounts, and then they shut everything down, including stoplights and shut down trains and all kinds of stuff, right? Okay, well, that movie just kind of at least demonstrated the concept as to how that societal panic would look, and that's what the end game is. The best way to destroy the United States is via societal panic. If you get the entire society whipped up in a frenzy, how do you get it to not be in a frenzy anymore? It is Chinese military doctrine to attempt to induce societal panic in their adversary. And arguably, the Chinese government got a little bit of a taste of this in the aftermath of the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline in May of 2021 that shut down gas to the eastern seaboard for several days. She said, noting Americans couldn't get to work, they couldn't take their kids to school, get folks to the hospital. It caused a bit of a panic. Now imagine that on a massive scale. Imagine not one pipeline, but many pipelines, disrupted and telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water, trains get derailed, air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning, Easterly continued. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario. Easterly was one of 4 witnesses at the CCP cyber threat to the American homeland and national security hearing. Joining General Paul Nakasone, commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Harry Coker Jr., director of the White House's Office of the National Cyber Director. I just thought he probably worked with Hunter Biden. During the same hearing, the FBI director echoed these sentiments, saying there is much more Congress, and the rest of the federal government need to do to ensure Americans are safe from potential cyber threats posed by the Chinese government. Wray also announced that his bureau effectively eliminated a Chinese malware attack on small businesses located in the U.S. Just this morning, we, the FBI, announced an operation where we and our partners identified hundreds of routers that had been taken over by the PRC state-sponsored hacking group known as Volt Typhoon. The Volt Typhoon malware enabled China to hide, among other things, pre-operational reconnaissance and network exploitation against critical infrastructure like our communications, energy, transportation, and water sectors, he said. Wray specified that the hacking group intended to find and prepare to destroy or degrade the civilian critical infrastructure that keeps us safe and prosperous. Now, this is the part of the conversation related to pre-positioning. Pre-positioning. This is what China's doing right now, okay? And just to kind of bring it full circle for you, here we are. China's cyber attackers target U.S. and allied militaries. It's not just here domestically. It's anywhere we operate or anywhere our allies are, this is happening, okay? Chinese state cyber actors are targeting infrastructure and military bases in the Asia Pacific belonging to the United States and its allies. including the Philippines, which they have recently dealt with cyber issues. And an uptick in hacking activities aimed at sabotaging vital systems in the event of a conflict, intelligence and cybersecurity sources have told Newsweek. They have invaded our computer systems, and they are able to sabotage, for example, military installations on Guam or any of the U.S. bases in Southeast Asia, said a Western intelligence source in a NATO nation, speaking on condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the issue. Pre-positioning, like I said, by China across critical online infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific was ongoing, according to a cybersecurity industry source in the region who was also granted anonymity due to the highly sensitive nature of the matter. Pre-positioning in military parlance means to advantageously place soldiers and equipment, or in the digital age, to embed malware in online networks, thus enabling fast action in a crisis. The practice aligned with China's strategic goals, namely sabotage and disruption in the scenario of a conflict in the Pacific, the source said. Over the last decade, China has invested widely in its military and cyber capabilities as it challenges the U.S. for leadership in all areas, including the economy and technology, military, and global governance, a goal its leader, Xi Jinping, has set for 2049 at the latest. The most likely military conflict between China and the U.S. is over Taiwan, which Beijing claims and has said it could take by force. Another flashpoint is the South China Sea, which China also claims and has heavily militarized, including by building islands. About a half a dozen nations contest ownership of territories and maritime zones in the energy-rich waters. And one U.S. treaty ally, the Philippines, is coming under increasing diplomatic and military pressure from China for refusing to acquiesce. Okay? So these cyber attacks, it already exist. It sounds like there's just a kill switch that hasn't been engaged yet. And once it is, what happens? Well, we can only guess at this point, right? Speculation is the name of the game. But what we can also do is be ready for the fact that that's almost an inevitability, right? We can't say for sure it will ever happen. But the fact that everybody's coming out and telling you about it, and the fact that it's happening to more than just here domestically, it's happening to our bases overseas as well as our allies in the Pacific, I would at least be ready for that level of disruption. So what does that mean? Well, just think of things you rely on when it comes to especially telecommunications, right? So if you rely on the internet for like everything, and I'm talking about like you order everything online or all of your goods come from like online ordering services, at least know where you can get those things that isn't online. And then have a way to pay for them that isn't digital, aka cash, or at the bare minimum, some precious metals, right? Because if things go down, the zeros and ones that we all rely on for a lot of what we do daily at this point in time will disappear. And so what's your plan of action if that happens? How are you going to communicate? If your cell phones go down, can you at least still talk to somebody nearby? Do you have any radio equipment? Do you know how to use it? Have you programmed any of it, right? Do you have cash? Do you have precious metals? Do you have things to trade if need be? Do you know where to get the things that you usually need? These are all things you should be planning for now. And everything else can kind of come secondary, but just focus on what you rely on that solely relies on telecommunications, and then figure out what you would do if you suddenly didn't have access to it. I think that's kind of important right now. And especially like if you live where I do, in a rural environment, right? Like I can't get everything I need or want from my local hardware store. Like I can get a lot of stuff, of course, and I support them quite a bit because, well, they're local and I want to make sure that our businesses stay open. But at the same time, I can't find every single thing I need there. I just can't, because they can't have every single thing in inventory. It's just impossible. So I have to order some things online. If those things suddenly weren't accessible to me anymore, how bad do I need them? And if the answer is really bad, then where else can I go to get them? And unfortunately for me, the nearest big box store that's going to have more of those types of things is an hour away at the minimum, right? And then that's if the vehicles are all still up and running. Who knows how far this all could go, right? So we got to be ready for it, you know? Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival, good to see you. He said 100% keep cash on hand. And I totally agree. Like, you got to have some way to pay for things that's not digital. If you don't, it could be really difficult. Unless you got everything. Unless you got everything and you don't even care. That's fine too, right? But a lot of us don't just have everything, which I don't expect anyone to, because I don't. So that's just where we're at. Now, I do want to say I am going to be jumping over to my members-only live stream here at 9:45, so in about 15 minutes. So, like I said, if you want to join YouTube channel membership, the join button is right down below. If you want to go to Subscribestar to support the channel directly, as well as get some preparedness incentives, as well as some exclusive content, then I will put a link in the chat right now for that, as well as in the description. But you know what? I think we had a good conversation tonight. Hopefully, everything that we've talked about is at least something you're somewhat aware of. But if not, at least you also have some new information now. And if there's anything I would take away from tonight, right, it would be that the focus isn't always where it needs to be. So when all of the focus is on, for example, the southern border, right, well then no one's looking at the northern border. So do your due diligence and make sure you know where ports of entry are if you're in a border state, regardless of whether or not it's northern or south. Just be aware of like the proximity to where some of these people could be coming in. And do yourself a favor when it comes to being prepared for these cyber attacks and the escalating conflict in the Middle East, because these strikes are going to continue just like the thumbnail says. So hopefully there was really an ad right now, Knight Who Says Knee. I apologize. I'm trying my best to navigate this new layout with YouTube, and it's a pain. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your patience and understanding, and I also appreciate your support more than anything. So if there's anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.